Single agency. Single agency is the most intuitive type of agency. An agent is a single agent when they represent only one principal. In a real estate context, if a broker represents only the buyer, they are a single agent. If the broker represents only the landlord, they are a single agent. Limited agency. You may be asking why we have a name for such a simple concept. While single agency is intuitive and simple, it is not always the type of agency which is created in real estate transactions. What if a broker wanted to represent both the buyer and the seller on a transaction? It is impossible for the broker to act as a single agent in this circumstance. If the broker represents both the buyer and the seller, the broker is acting as a limited agent. The agency is limited because it is impossible for the broker to act as a complete agent for both parties. The limitation on this type of agency relationship will make more sense as we discuss the obligations an agent has to their principal. If a broker wishes to represent both parties in a transaction, both parties must consent to the limited representation. Designated agency. If a broker wants to appoint one agent to represent one particular client, this agent becomes a designated agent. Brokers will often use designated agency in order to avoid all agents representing all clients who are represented by the brokerage. Remember, in a real estate transaction, the agent is the broker and the principal is the client. All sales agents are agents of the broker. Due to this relationship, any client or principal represented by the broker is by definition represented by all the agents affiliated with that broker. All agents may not want to represent all clients. Also, this may cause unnecessary complications if one agent represents the buyer and another represents the seller on a transaction. In this case, without designated agency, all agents must act as limited agents. Let's take an example of two agents within the same brokerage a bit further. One represents the buyer and one represents the seller on the same transaction. As we mentioned, without designated agency, both agents would represent both sides. Now let's use designated agency and specify which agent represents which client. By designating one agent to represent the buyer and one agent to represent the seller, we avoid the necessity of both agents acting as limited agents. Note the broker still represents both the buyer and the seller. The broker will not be able to avoid acting as a limited agent with respect to this transaction. Please note, documentation and consent requirements are very specific with regards to limited agency. All parties must understand what limited agency means to them and their agency relationships. Once the parties understand, they must consent in writing to the limited representation. This is referred to as informed consent.